So this week is a little bit different as one of my guests, Stephen Sacco, guest for episode 71, turns the tables and interviews me as the guest for It's About Language. Stephen, with his background in connecting languages with business, engineering, and organizations, wanted to get a little bit more insight into why I established this podcast and what it is that we are saying to the world about the importance of languages to help to bring about a more peaceful and secure future. So I hope you'll enjoy this interview and hope we'll give you some insights into It's About Language from my perspective.
Hello, language professionals. Welcome to It's About Language. As you can see, I am not Norah Jones, so please don't touch that dial. I am Steve Sacco, Professor Emeritus of French and Italian from San Diego State University. I'm here today to interview Norah Jones, podcaster and language advocate extraordinaire. A few weeks ago, I talked to Norah about being podcasted, and she accepted. I knew that Norah, who is so talented at interviewing her guests, had a compelling story of her own, so she said yes. Just a little background. Norah started It's About Language in May 2020 in an effort to thwart the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on language educators. Over the last 3 years of the podcast, It's About Language has captivated over 25,000 listeners representing 60 countries during her 90-plus podcasts. Norah has interviewed many of the top language professionals in the field, and It's About Language is arguably the leading podcast of its type on the planet. So today, turnabout is fair play. Instead of Norah interviewing her latest expert, I will be interviewing Norah Jones. Good afternoon, Norah. Welcome to It's About Language. I hope you're not nervous.
Well, I thank you for this welcome to the podcast, and I am so much looking forward to the conversation that we will have because it's always a delight to talk with you. And I'm quite sure it's going to be a fascinating experience to be interviewed by you, Stephen.
I hope so. There's a lot of pressure on me right now. It's like shooting 2 free throws with 5 seconds left in the basketball game when I was a high school senior. Okay. Norah, many of your listeners are intrigued about you, your background, and your motivation for creating It's About Language. Tell us more about the story behind creating this platform.
Well, Steve, it's interesting because I have enjoyed so many amazing experiences over my career as an educator. I didn't plan on going into education at all. I just knew I loved languages and I had taken them as many at a time and as long as I could and traveled as much as I was able when I was younger. And when I got married and ended up in a place that I wasn't expecting to end up, but for love did, namely South Central Virginia, and I discovered that cows were a delightful species, but not exactly the way I wanted to spend my days, I stumbled into, happily, a lateral entry into teaching first French and then having Spanish added to it when the principal realized that I didn't implode. So from the very beginning, I've felt very welcomed into the education community and into the language segment of it in particular. Having wonderful colleagues from the very beginning that taught me about how to be vulnerable and how to welcome vulnerability in students, and having a personality that apparently wandered into board meetings that I wasn't supposed to be in. And you know what happens if you show interest in spending time with a group, they'll invite you to do so. So over the decades of my work, I had a chance to meet incrementally more and more people in my community, in my state, in my region, in the nation. And I just have enjoyed the relationships tremendously. So when COVID hit and the world came to a stop and family needs created the same kind of decision-making in my life as it made for many, namely that I needed to make a change in order to make sure my family could remain secure and safe and financially solvent, that I left my full-time job. And of course, the whole world left being able to be together. And when I looked out at a world where I was going to lose an opportunity to stay in connection with the wonderful and amazing people that I had come across in my years in world language education, I had said to myself, and I think I've even said this in a podcast before, I said to myself, if I call my friends and they're very busy with their own needs at this very difficult time, they may be delighted to hear from me, but they may not have time to talk with me. But if I say, hey, I'd like you to be a podcast guest, that maybe they would be interested. And so I looked into what it took to start a podcast and decided that I would just start as best as I could. And because of those connections, because of the kindness of my colleagues, because they have so many things to share with the world, it was such a rich experience for me. And I knew that it would continue to be for listeners. So it's been very good feeling to know that indeed people have been receptive to the amazing skills, insights, humor, and humanity of those that I have connected up with over these 2.5 years.
That's incredible. Notice that I mentioned to you a few weeks ago that I thought maybe podcasting is going to be truly for us the future, because we get to express ourselves without having any kind of reviewers marking up the page and telling us what to say, et cetera. We get to express ourselves on podcasts like yours in original language, original thought, without any kind of interference from others.
It's Steve, I'm so glad you brought that back, because I know that was something that was dear to your heart that we did talk about when we had you here as the guest on It's About Language. And I can affirm that just recently, yet again, I was in a meeting, and there was a person that found out that I had a podcast, and she was like, oh, wonderful. I'm going to go look for it right now, and I'm going to subscribe right now. This will be so exciting. I really want to hear what you have to say. I just love podcasts. And when you say what you just said, I realize that while we've all had, say, blogs or things we've written that are articles or any number of written things, that I don't know if I've ever had anybody come up to me and basically, as it were, clutch my lapel and say how much I love reading. But the podcasts, because it's the voice, and you know that my take on language is that language is voice, language is primarily what we hear and work with and is spoken, that is still appealing to folks. So yes, I think podcasts and the voice in general have an extraordinarily strong future, as well as in a very important and critical past.
Excellent. Going back just a little bit, we both started teaching high school at about the same time, and you said that you started with Spanish and French, kind of like I did, but you left out a couple of languages, Russian, ESL. So holy mackerel, at that time, you were a one-woman language department. Did you get 4 salaries, or did they just pay you 1 salary for teaching 4 languages?
Alas, I would say 1 salary for 4 languages. But what it did do, I think the multilingual aspect here, especially in an area where there's not a tremendous number of resources. I mean, not that it's impoverished in that way, but it's not an urban area in which I live. It's a rural and small city area. When you have someone that comes in with a multiplicity of languages and background like that, and exposure to the world, and you have lots of needs, that is helpful to the system, but it also opened doors for me. I'm always grateful that one of the things that was discerned was that instead of having a supervisor as a new position in our county for languages, because it can be considered to be central office overhead, they came up with a creative and money-saving idea of having instructional specialists. And they started with world language and social studies, which happened to be a good a friend and colleague of mine. And I interviewed for and got that position. That opened a tremendous number of doors because I was able to first full-time in the office, and then I requested that if we were going to continue, which they wanted to be able to be inside the school and do supervision at the same time. Well, if you have a nutcase on your hands that enjoys these various languages, does these various languages, has this kind of background, and is willing to both teach pretty much full-time and supervise, well, that's a pretty easy bet then. But the doors opened because of the multilingualism and because of that exposure, and I'm always grateful for that.
So in this rural setting, you had the opportunity of teaching Russian, which I've never seen in a rural high school before. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, and that is such an important opportunity, I think. And one of the aspects of it is it didn't come as fully about as I would have liked, because I guess in general, maybe for school systems that are in areas where people aren't flocking in for all sorts of reasons, or potentially because of how the principal and staff were thinking about my potential trajectory, the principal didn't want to make it a full program because he was afraid I was going to leave. So what I started was a program that I experimented with before school started, a full class period, and after. It turned out after was better, after having a full period and providing for credit through testing for those levels that I was offering. The irony is that a year or two after I started that, there was another hire that came into our building who, with her military background, knew Russian. And so there were actually two of us Russian speakers in the school at the same time, yet we still didn't have a Russian program. We both taught Spanish officially, but it was a delightful and effective way to introduce students to a language that they might not have otherwise have got.
That is remarkable. As we discussed last year, the Department of Defense has come up with a program to basically $3 million over 5 years to either strengthen or introduce critical languages, especially for ROTC members at the high school level. So do you see this as a possibility of strengthening Russian, languages like Russian or Chinese?
Well, Stephen, the thing is, we're talking about Russian, we're talking about so many important languages that are not commonly taught here in the United States. And when it comes to your question specifically about, say, the military need, that's especially powerful. I mean, I just finished last week from this recording being with the Joint National Committee on Languages, the JNCL Nicholas Language Advocacy Days. And what we did there virtually, because of just the nature of trying to see senators and congresspeople now, is those of us that were delegates from all over the country got to meet with our legislators. And one of the bills that it needs to be continued the appropriation, but it's there, is what's called WLARA. And the WLARA basically stands for the opportunity in those schools and school systems that have junior ROTC programs to be funded because of the security needs of the United States. And what we're adding to that in our requests is for a brand new legislation, which would allow that kind of grant funding for innovation in languages, especially those that are of deep security need, economic need, that have not commonly been taught in the United States, that which plays such a strong role in our upcoming future, for those languages to also receive grants from potentially an office in the U.S. Department of Education. So that's an ongoing ask. that we hope to be able to bring to bear. It's important because all students need access to these languages that have so much of a role to play for our security and our economic security. And we're delighted that they're already available for those that are engaged in the military enterprise, but we'd like to spread that around a little bit. But I do believe that because we are facing the needs of the global security, global interaction, global politics, global economics, that there is a future for those languages, despite sometimes feelings to the contrary in this interesting country we have where not too many people take languages.
Well, we'll be looking forward to that because last year there was no DoD grant. And so only 9 schools got funded in the first year, one in the Atlanta area that I recall, one in Coronado, California. And we were hoping for a second year, but it never happened. And now third year. So there are going to be a lot more proposals this time around if JNCL can advocate on our behalf.
I certainly hope so. And thank you for those specifics, because it's important that everyone that has young people in school, everyone that they themselves are interested in learning, be it a collegiate or adult level, anyone that's engaged in understanding the role that languages play in our economic and security lives should be, in fact, very energized by knowing how much need there is compared with often how much funding or availability there is.
So how did you get started? First of all, you're a high school teacher like me, and then all of a sudden you become an advocacy expert in the southeastern United States and within the state of Virginia. How did that come about?
Well, I think every single language educator is an advocate, whether they know it or not. Their advocacy, especially for those that are engaged in this very humanistic experience of teaching the human talent, language, are people that are excited about the words that come out of humans' mouths and excited about the cultures in which those languages live. So every language teacher is an advocate in their own way. If they're a strong and good advocate, they excite young people and invite these young adults into a future where language can play a role in their lives. If they are the kind of person that recognizes the bigger picture, it has the energy and the personality to reach out more, they become advocates in the more formal sense of the word, getting engaged in world language organizations or even in JNCL, which is the advocate for language education, in ways that help their voice to be heard better. That's a path that happened for me. I saw the change in the lives of my young people. I saw how their growth was. I saw their excitement. I saw the opportunities open for them. And I also looked around, especially the more and more I got into boards and organizations and then into publishing. The more that I saw, the more I realized that there were opportunities for languages to be offered where it wasn't necessarily being offered at the right ages for human growth and development that wasn't necessarily happening, and certainly with a heart for what we call less commonly taught languages and their power to grow the understanding of the world, to see that that wasn't being done as much as my heart would like. All of those things lead to, I think, a natural sense of wanting to be an advocate more formally.
So in addition to a great teaching career, and you continue as a major advocate leader, you mentioned in your two or three sentences earlier about publishing. Tell us about your publishing, because it started, I guess, in 1997 and it's still going on.
Well, actually, it's interesting that you ask it that way, because it started back in the late 1980s when I was the department chair for our school and the supervisor for our county. So I was engaged in, say, textbook evaluations and taking a look at textbook adoptions with my colleagues, of course. But as the supervisor, I was kind of the point person, and I tend to look in depth in front of the folks that are sent from the various publishing companies at the content about what seems to be an effective way to express something, or how best activities might be made. I happen to have said something in front of the person that had showed up for our county, who happened to be a national sales manager, about the fact that they understood accurately the nature of how to do a formative assessment for listening. Well, when you start talking about things like that, when you start talking almost in writerese, if I can coin that phrase for a language, then and if your group, which the county did discern that they did want the materials that happened to have been presented, it sort of comes together where they reach back out, and you dangle a worm in front of a hungry fish, which I seem to always be. Would you like to take a look at our newest book that we're developing? Sure. Would you like to comment on some of the content? Sure. Can we send you galleys that aren't even complete? And each level that publishing does that, now I know from the inside, they're seeing whether or not you provide some decent feedback, whether you're answering what they asked for, whether you're helping them and saving them time rather than wasting time. And I seem to keep running that track and jumping over some of those hurdles until finally I was engaged in being asked to take I was called to a representative job, a sales representative job. And it was supposed to start right away, like in the January or February of a year. And I thought and prayed a lot about it, because that was a big, big deal. I had loved my students and I loved what I was doing in the county, but it had been quite a while. And I thought maybe it's time for a new adventure. I turned them down for leaving during the school year. I believe in my contract and I didn't want to break a contract. So I'd said I could start in the summer and see how it turned out. They allowed me to start part-time. Like I say, I'm a nutcase. That does help. I've started part-time, so I worked in the evenings on some of the things that could help move that adoption process forward, which is what they were in a hurry about. Turned out that I enjoyed it. And so for a couple of years, I stayed in publishing. My own children had not yet graduated from high school yet. So after a few years, I went back to the classroom. Luckily, I went back to the same positions that I had had. I felt very blessed with that. And once they graduated from high school, I had been contacted by another publisher. And so I was able to ease into that publishing and to be able to continue, and then got called by a third publisher. So I've been in 3 publishing companies as an employee, first by looking at materials, then by writing, because I did write the introductory, I shouldn't say introductory, the contextual materials, the activities for the material that was being produced by what's now called Vista Higher Learning, back when it was first being developed. And I considered that to be very interesting and a great honor, and it was a lot of fun, and it also kept my name in the pot, as it were. And I just enjoy talking about it and teaching others to talk about why resources and good teaching and instructional approaches are just critical to making students' lives open up. It's an interesting experience to watch the relationship between educational institutions and the resources that they use. And here's where I'm coming from. It is extremely important and extremely positive that we have been finally emerging from our 18th and 19th century approach to limited educational access with an emphasis on classical studies that have fossilized previous to the last, say, 40 to 50 years, language studies as an approach of the classical type, that is to say, a Latin style reading and grammatical study. It is extremely important, in my opinion, that we have moved slowly, surely, sometimes quickly, sometimes it's pretty quick, but often slowly and surely, but absolutely necessarily in the direction of understanding that modern language is just that. It's a spoken phenomenon. It's a living phenomenon. It's consistently changing phenomenon. It is embedded in culture. It must be understood in culture. It's about connecting people that are alive right now. And there are interesting things to read. Yes, there are many of that. And for some, sitting with a good book in the second or third language that they have learned is the greatest pleasure in their lives. Wonderful. But for so many young adults and small children, certainly, 'tis true that connecting with humans that are alive is critical. I am so delighted to see the growth in the understanding that authenticity of content and approach, connecting with real life human beings, and bringing in the living experience, which is always changing, is the way that we're going with world language education. What I think is an interesting phenomenon then is the attitude towards and the development of resources. Resources, and how I live my life, resources are those things that we take that save us time and can change our lives for the better. I speak with more passion potentially than some because I was exhausted as a teacher. My nature of my job, the nature of my leadership meant that I kept giving myself the wide range of languages and levels so that my newer teachers were not feeling overwhelmed, so that they could become part of the community of educators in the language world and feel like they could make it, so that they could be mentored by others and not drown. But it meant that I was having a lot on my plate, which I enjoyed, but I also watched. I know, Steve, what it feels like to talk a language with people in my travels, in my family history, in going to Croatia in the summer and being plopped in the middle of the family with my cousins and my aunt and my grandmother and not being able to say a thing and just being immersed in sink or swim, that I knew how it felt to be able to achieve language in that way. And I was watching my students were speaking, but I didn't feel like they were speaking in the way that I knew that they should, that they could, that they felt they were succeeding. Their parents felt that they were succeeding. The administrations felt that they were succeeding. Everybody's telling me they're succeeding, but I felt like there's got to be more, but I'm so tired. And what I discovered, and again, this was the late 80s, what I discovered that there was a material that was handed to me that, yes, I didn't go through it from page 2 to page 247. Here's an exercise 2, here's exercise 3, here's exercise, but it was a resource that I could use. So I didn't have to create everything. I could sit back and allow students to have a tool in front of them, and then we could create together. And that's when the tide turned for me, in understanding what created resources provided to our exhausted educators could do. So tying it back together, what I just said, authenticity, the reality, the constantly changing nature of the language and culture. We are blessed now because we have digital world that's allowing more and more of that to come in and become part of a structured resource that I still say helps those that are busy to know that they've got a support system so that they can be creative, but that they have the resources that they need. And when I look out at districts and schools that have created good quality resource sets or buying the resources so that their teachers are not constantly having to create from scratch, that's the direction I'm excited for, because that can bring in any kind of language, be it traditional or less commonly taught. It can create possibilities, but it's got to be a combination. Good quality resources combined with teachers that are excited and can be creative, that I know will help to bring about a positive language future. I just don't want folks to get exhausted thinking they've got to create everything themselves. So I'm still a resource creator junkie, shall I say.
Yep. Yep. Well, Norah, you kind of answered my last question, but I want to ask it anyway in case there's any other answers that you want to provide. As you know, the Modern Language Association is painting a bleak picture of enrollments in certain languages. I'm thinking of my own language, the major language that I taught, French. French programs are disappearing from high schools, and not only that, but as majors disappearing from colleges and universities. Despite those numbers and all the podcasts that I've listened to, I hear this optimistic tone that you continue to hold on to about the future of language.
Absolutely. I am optimistic for our future because I know that humans cannot be human without language. I know that as people begin to address their fears and concerns, that they're going to, by definition, realize they have to turn to one another. And in doing so, I am optimistic that even by itself, that folks will realize that the connectedness with other humans means that it is good to know how someone else thinks so that one can work with them. They know that, they think that through their language. They cannot tell you their deepest thoughts. They cannot provide you a seamless experience if you are constantly working at translating back and forth. They cannot provide you the cultural insight that allows us to be able to cooperate and achieve what we need to achieve in keeping ourselves healthy and safe without understanding each other. So there's always this return to the humanity, which is language and culture. But, and now I have a nefarious cackle that adds even to my typical optimistic approach, I am absolutely fascinated by and very excited by what will happen to exactly what I'm talking about based on the AI, the artificial intelligence that's coming up, in particular, the release and this explosion about Chat GPT and other types of artificial intelligence writing. Uncanny, everyone says. And yes, where are the limitations here and there? But here is where I'm very excited, because already, even though this conversation, if you will, just started back in November, already we're reaching the horizon where those that are in the know about how artificial intelligence self-grows, there's so much input now. The smart work that is coming with artificial intelligence is going past that which we've kind of been, I don't know, not maybe just joking about, but certainly talking about in casual conversation. And here's where it's going. It's going to where we will not have to sit down at a keyboard and type in strange messages in order to be able to communicate with a machine with a digital interface to be able to make things happen. We will talk to the computer. When we talk to a computer, we will be using human language We have to use human language, be it to write it in the keyboard in human language, like I'm talking it, or speaking it into a microphone like I am right now. We will have to learn how to continue the precision that has made us good communicators with each other in order to be able to teach and work with the machines so they can help us with those kinds of writings and activities that people are already talking about. It's going to be taken over by computer, but we have to talk to them about how to make that happen. We're going to talk to each other, and we're going to talk to the artificial intelligence in human language, all languages, not just one language. I'm excited about that. I'm reading about that now from those that know AI, which I barely do, except for reading incessantly about this. But I also remember several years ago at our national conference, a futurist talking about the future is voice, not the kind of coding and texting we're doing. The future is voice. That, Stephen, is a human future. That's a future we return to that which is our deepest skill, our deepest love, our deepest identity. And I am bullish about that. I am optimistic about that. And I think it's going to be just crazy, won't it? That our human language can bring about the tools that will help us to live together, work together, and solve problems together with humans and with computers, all through language.
I'm glad I asked the question. Norah, we got to have you as a guest more often.
Well, Stephen, I would like to congratulate you on your official interview debut
on a podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks for this opportunity to be interviewed today. And I hope that you feel, as the interviewer, that you got the answers to the questions that you wanted.
I sure did.
Great. Well, thank you, Stephen.
Okay, you take care. God bless.
So I hope you enjoyed this podcast and get an idea about why it's important to me that your voice be heard, that our voices for language be heard to help to make a more secure and joyful future. Look forward to sharing more podcasts with you in the upcoming weeks and months. And until soon, take care.